discussed or considered in the meeting to which this certification applies. And we need a motion.
I will, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Okay. Will you do a roll call?
Supervisor Mitchell?
Yes.
Supervisor Smith?
Yes.
Supervisor Thompson? Supervisor Cundiff?
Yes.
Supervisor Carter?
Yes.
Supervisor Tatum?
Yes.
And Chairman Mitchell?
Yes.
Thank you.
If I can get my papers together, Chris. Oh, we find that. Are you ready? Yeah. Okay, I'll call the board together for a public hearing on a proposed 2001 budget. And I guess, Mr. Whitlow, we're ready to proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and those that may be viewing online this evening. Of course, tonight is actually 3 public hearings, Mr. Chairman, as required by the code. The first being tonight is a public hearing on the proposed modified 2020-21 budget. The second hearing is on the setting of tax levies or tax rates. And the third hearing, Mr. Chairman, is for the real property tax reassessment. And those are 3 public hearings. And by way of introduction, I've asked Mr. Carter if he doesn't mind coming forward. We have just a small review of the modified budget. This will be redundant to the board and likely most viewers, as we've talked about this on numerous occasions now. But I'll quickly go through this summary again for the board of the modified budget. And I'll ask Mr. Carter, Mr. Brian Carter, if he'll help me advance the slide. So if I may, before we start into tonight's public hearing, before we hear from the public, Mr. Chairman. As we know, this is a modified proposed county budget. That was a modified budget from what was presented to the board on March the 17th. So Mr. Carter will walk through these slides again, if you will. Now, with the projection during COVID and the effects on the budget, of course, we've shared this previously with the board and with the public. We do expect our real estate collection to decline from 97% to 95.7%. That is lower than the collection ratio during the Great Recession. So we are trying to anticipate that decline, as well as personal property. We thought that we would be looking at anticipated new growth in personal property. Of course, we do not see that occurring now. We've had very healthy growth there in the last couple of years. Sales tax revenue, a reduction of 15%. Meals tax revenue reduction of 25%. Lodging tax revenue reduction of 50%. And an interest income reduction of 10%. Of course, that's a total loss now of projected once local revenue increase. Now certainly would not realize that, and that's about 2.7 million, 2.6, 2.7 million. So any new revenue absorbed certainly is going to absorb those revenue losses. And so a very nominal $400,000 or so increase of 0.65% in terms of revenue. Over 50% of the county's budget, of course, is funded by the state and federal funds. We've shared that the Virginia Secretary of Finance projects $1 billion loss in revenue at the state level, both in next fiscal year and the following in the biennium. The state funding reductions are likely coming, as they did with the prior recession. We just do not know yet what that will be, but we know they're likely. We will know more this summer as we get closer to July and August. The General Assembly will reconvene. And so, as shared, this budget is a modified strategic pause budget, and it's now been the course, and it's kept us quite busy over the last couple of months. Almost all new spending has been subtracted from the proposed budget. A hiring freeze has been implemented. All non-essential spending has been effective since this past March 19th. Any proposed discretionary revenue has now dropped. And the budget subtractions, certainly our cost of living adjustment for employees, Of course, $900,000 in new funding to the schools, $200,000 in new capital funding, both on the county side but also the school side, as well as new positions have all been subtracted from the budget. And in addition, approximately $1 million above and beyond that. So, Mr. Carter, what does that look like? Back in November, when we were working with the various departments, county departments, on budget proposals, there were a lot of needs, both operationally and capital needs, to the tune of about $3.4 million that had been requested. We knew early on our modest revenue growth in the county would not be able to meet all of those needs. And so prior to the March 17th budget proposal, the initial budget, staff reduced that budget by $3.4 million. And then we had COVID hit us in mid-March, mid to late March. And so since COVID has hit and those projection numbers have changed in our revenue, staff went back and reduced the budget further of another $3 million. $2.6 million of that were in operational and capital reductions that I shared with you previously. In addition, we went back and had to cut another $400,000 out of this budget to really get a balanced budget proposal to you. And that included reductions in our maintenance line items account, service contracts, utilities, supplies, travel, training, marketing, professional services. And as I shared with you last week, we were really down into the weeds of trying to get a balanced budget, and total reductions of $6.4 million since November. Mr. Carter. Last week, this board approved the Franklin County Public School System budget as a level funded budget, and you'll see those numbers there. That's level funded from last year. This board did not reduce funding to the school system, and nor did the board increase funding to the school system. I will say we have allocated, just as we did in the current year, for our CSA private education placement, where this past year we started sharing those costs with the school system. Our recommendation is to continue that sharing next year, whereby we will begin invoicing the school system for those school placements. And so money is set aside for that responsibility of special education private day placements. This budget is a maintenance budget with no tax rate adjustments. It absorbs the significant revenue losses, as I previously shared with you. Essentially, all new spending has been subtracted from the budget. The modified budget is $145,953,329. Most of that is pass-through dollars and very little discretionary local dollars. As I said, 53% of our budget comes from the state and federal government to fund obligations, including social service programs, corrections, comp board, etc. So most of this budget is pass-through dollars. The General Assembly will reconvene this summer, as I mentioned, to address the budget reduction shortfalls to the tune we do not know. We do not know how far or how deep the Commonwealth of Virginia may get into locality funding, but we are expecting that. We just do not know to what degree yet. As I mentioned, adopted budgets are fluid. They can be amended as needed. Our budget's going to be continually reassessed as other local governments around the Commonwealth continually over the next fiscal year, really over the next probably couple of fiscal years. Certainly an improving revenue picture late summer, fall, or winter, that will allow us maybe some flexibility. A declining revenue picture will have the exact opposite effect. And so we stand ready certainly to have those discussions, and we'll have to continually monitor this going forward. Mr. Carter. So as I mentioned last week, the board, the Franklin County Board of Supervisors adopted the school budget as presented last week, level funded. And of course, tonight we're holding our required public hearings. Again, there were three this evening, first on the budget, the second on the tax rate, the third on the reassessment. And then state code requires that localities approve budgets, but there's a 7-day waiting period after the public hearing. So the earliest we possibly could approve the county budget would be next Tuesday, June the 2nd. That's typically the practice and the historic procedure of the Board of Supervisors typically has been to adopt the budget 1 week prior, or 1 week after, I should say, the budget public hearing. Important for several reasons. One, for finance staff to be able to load the system, for department directors to be able to get the information into the various departments so we can hit the ground running July 1st. So we are behind the ball this year, as everyone knows. Typically, we adopt a budget at the end of April. So while we would like to have had a budget adopted sooner, we certainly, under the circumstances, understand why we're here tonight. And so, depending on the board, following the public hearings discussion this evening as to the board's wishes as to a possible meeting next Tuesday for budget adoption consideration or further discussion. And that would be the pleasure of the board, certainly, that we can discuss. And then following budget adoption, whenever that may be, we certainly will have summer and quarterly reviews, and as Mr. Carter does monthly in the financial reviews, and I think we've been sharing weekly with the board information that we have found from the state in terms of revenues and our local revenue picture. And this is just something that we will, it's the new normal that we're all going to have to continually stay on top of. So lastly, Mr. Carter, I'd like to thank you personally and Ms. Wagner in the audience, who's done a tremendous job with this budget. I say budgets, plural, because I think none of us certainly were anticipating this. None of us want to be here, but we're here nonetheless. And as I shared earlier, not to belabor this, back from March 17th, and just as I shared the tax ticket from 1920, we're here 100 years later, deliberating the business of the county. The county is in good financial position in terms of our bond rating, in terms of where we are financially. If there was ever, as I've shared, if there was ever a good time for something horrible to happen, like COVID, it hit Franklin County at a time that the county's financially sound, and I think you all have heard that from our financial advisors. It speaks to the good fiscal discipline of previous boards, and certainly the good fiscal discipline of this board, as well as our taxpayers. So I will pause there, Mr. Chairman, because I know we have 3 public hearings this evening to hear from the public. If anyone in the public is here that may wish to speak, some have offered, I think, comments via email, and we have shared those with you. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, if following the public hearings, if there's any questions or input, information I can share with the board further, I'll be glad to do so.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I'll open the session for public hearing for citizens' comments. Do we have any?
I have printed out what I received from both my email, written correspondence, 2 of those came from, and then also the public comment form. I did not see anybody come physically in attendance. I'm gonna go peek out real quick, just one more look, but if there's no one there, that's all I've received.
Okay.
No, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And so I'll close the public hearing, and we'll move on to item number 2. And Mr. Whitlow, if you're hearing on the setting of tax levies.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I mentioned on the previous presentation, staff is not recommending any changes to the rates at this point. They're in front of you there, and they've been advertised for this public hearing accordingly, if there's anyone that may be here that wish to speak.
Okay, I'll open the floor up for citizens' comments, if we have any. And I'll close the public hearing for item number 2.
I have a quick comment, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in one of our letters, one of my constituents thought that we were raising personal property taxes, and we're not.
No. No.
So I just want, if they're at home watching, I just want them to know that, you know, keeping the real estate at 61, yes, there is essentially, you know, an increase in real estate taxes, but there is none on personal property. So I just wanted to go on record if they're at home watching my chance, so they know that there is no increase in personal property.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll close the hearing on item number 2, and we'll move on to item number 3. Public hearing for the notice of proposed real property tax reassessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, every 4 years, the county goes through a process of reassessment. Some localities reassess property every year, annually. Franklin County reassesses every 4 years. In fact, the code actually, incidentally, although very few localities do this, there are some that can reassess every 6 years. Historically, Franklin County did market adjustments. That's the actual market value of your property, of your real estate. And we have done so every 4 years in Franklin County. And so you have that before you this year. The last market adjustment was done in 2016. Currently, the 2020 reassessment was a property market adjustment of 5.13%. That's a little over 1.25% or so per year annually. And I can answer certainly any questions the board may have, but Mr. Chairman, those rates are before the board and the public this evening, if anyone's here for the public hearing that may wish to speak.
Okay, thank you. And I'll open the public hearing for any citizens' comments. If there are none, I'll close the public hearing. And this takes care of the public notice of 1, 2, and 3. And Mr. Whitlow, do you have any other matters?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just one other, just as a follow-up item for the board, now that the board has held the required 3 public hearings, we would look as staff possibly for next Tuesday, pleasure of the board, if the board is available, possibly if the board wishes to have further discussion regarding the adoption of the budget next Tuesday or sometime perhaps next week. If not, certainly if calendars and so forth don't align, we can work with the board whenever you wish to do so. And I can answer any questions if the board needs more information from the staff. Certainly, we've shared quite a bit of information with you all over the last several weeks, and in your weekly packets. I hope that's been beneficial to you. I certainly can answer any questions, and Mr. Carter's here, and we can provide more information that the board may deem necessary.
Okay.
I've got a couple questions for staff, if that's all right. For the citizens and businesses, and like me, I'm very optimistic about the outcome of all this, but there are some businesses that are going to have a hard time to recover. And Mike, if I'm speaking correctly, we still have around 1,900 people actively on unemployment in Franklin County. So I would like for the staff, it doesn't have to be done right now, but as we get closer to tax collection season, we need to have something in place to assure the citizens that if they're not able to pay their taxes, either one, we waive the late fee. I don't know if we could set up a payment plan for some of these businesses or citizens, but I'd like to weigh all the options to assure our citizens that if they have fell on financial hard times, that we will work with them, businesses especially, because I know there's a few businesses that probably aren't going to recover. We've already had a couple go under. Spoke with a business owner today, and He's just a few weeks from shutting his doors. So I want to assure the citizens and the business owners in the county that we will work with them if they need it. So I'm open to hear some ideas from staff on how to do that.
Yeah, Mr. Mitchell, I think to answer your question, and certainly understand that point of view and that concern. Of course, tax collection by the county, of course, it's assessed by the commissioner, and of course, it's administered by the treasurer. There is only so much that the Board of Supervisors legally, from a legal standpoint, can do. Many localities during the height of COVID have worked with legal counsels and so forth, looking at their county code, whether it be tax penalty, late penalty waivers, etc. Certainly this board, I can bring information back to this board if this board would like staff to do so, and what that may look like. But it would require a code amendment to the county code. It's something that has to be done legislatively and not necessarily done administratively. But I will look to our legal counsel. Certainly, I think his office has been busy not only with Franklin County as his client, but a lot of local government attorneys around Virginia have been wrestling with this as to what possibilities we can do. So we can bring back information.
And as we move forward with this, it'd be nice if the public could really know that what we do today, what we do next Tuesday, we're going to reevaluate monthly and or quarterly to see state, federal funds, see what we're actually going to get. If we're able to do breaks, we'll consider it at that point. But right now, if we were to do any more cuts, we would probably have to look at cutting personnel, and that's something that I don't think any citizen or supervisor wants. So I think it's important that the public knows that it's, you mentioned in the weeds, I think it's down to that, and I wouldn't want to support that. So
yes, Mr. Mitchell, thank you. To your point, and as shared previously with the board, this is uncharted waters territory. We know come July and August, we're going to have to look at the budget. As the school system, they're going to have to see really where the Commonwealth of Virginia, where those funding streams are coming from and what they may look like. It's going to be very fluid. It's going to be, as opposed to an annual budget process, this will likely be a monthly budget process for some time, at least for the next fiscal year. And so to your point, Mr. Mitchell, yes, we will continually, and to the public, this will continually be evaluated, continually be flexible and fluid, as we have no choice but to do so. But thank you.
And I would add, we do have the ability to, if you have some extra funds, to pay ahead on your taxes, and I hope people will utilize that as best they can.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a quick
Yes,
comment?
ma'am.
Mr. Whitlow, I just want to take the opportunity to underscore the variability of what we're facing in the next few months with respect to the fact that we won't know state numbers until perhaps July or August, keeping in mind that our state funding is about 53% of our budget. That's significant. And also, given the fact that we adopted the school's budget last week, any further deterioration in their funding streams is going to fall on this municipal body, I believe, Mr. Whitlow.
Yes, and it primarily, of course, we will appropriate funds this year. Our recommendation to the board is not necessarily a lump sum appropriation for the entire year. I think it would be prudent, as many local governments, to do quarterly appropriations until we know better revenue pictures. But to your question, and Ms. Smith, regarding the school system budget, of course, now that that's been adopted, I do understand most of the school system budget, like the county budget, is really in personnel. And I do think from a contractual obligation, I think the school system, of course, upon that adoption last week, have sent out their personnel contracts for the year. So a lot of that money is likely obligated for next year, but it's not to say that we can possibly look I don't know what that would look like, but certainly that obligation has been made.
I think the best characterization, Mr. Whitlow, that you've utilized is the strategic pause that we're in. You know, some individuals may view a budget adoption as a done deal, and this is what we're going to live with for the next 12 months. This is so the exception to the rule. And I think, you know, we're going to wait in anticipation of the state funding reports that we get, which will be, they're going to be critical in terms of how bad, or maybe, hopefully, it'll be more improved than we expect. But I just wanted to underscore that because there's a lot we don't know.
Okay, thank you. I guess we need to look at.
I'd like to make another comment, if you don't mind, please.
Yes, sir.
I think a lot of times when we discuss about the public, we put a lot of stuff on the county's back. But also the public needs to know, and I bring this up as a help to the public, that there's several agencies that are able to help you with your property taxes, your heating, oil, electricity, all that stuff. And I think everybody needs to exhaust that end before we actually turn into the county as far as breaks and stuff's concerned. It's like Mr. Whitlow said that this is different waters for the county. We've never experienced it before. But I would like to remind people also that there are government agencies out there that can help you. And you need to make sure that you check and somebody out there can help you. But I just want to remind the public that there's always help for you. If we can't do it through the county, we can find it through others.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would like to reiterate what I told this body a few weeks ago. It's a tough time, tough cuts. I think Chris and staff have done a great job with the budget, but with that being said, I would like to propose a cut of 5 cents on the personal property tax. Everybody in this county's got a vehicle. That'll help everybody a little bit. I think we need to level this real estate reassessment so that people are not hit with an increase on the real estate taxes. It's time for us to step up to the plate. I know we got a letter from Davenport about the revenue fund. I went on the Governmental Accounting and Procedures site, and according to that, any non-committed monies could be used by this. That's above the 18 million we have to hold. So there's a couple $1 million in there we can work with. And I will not vote for this budget unless we do those 3 things to help the citizens.
All right. What are your 3 things?
I want to cut the personal property tax by 5 cents. I want the ability to use up to $1 million, $2 million out of the rainy day fund. And I want to level the real estate tax increase that people are going to be hit with due to the reassessment.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
I want to, first off, thank this board for being patient with me in the last few weeks. It's been very trying, and you all know that. You've been there for me, and for that, I thank you. I want to say that I've said this before at the last meeting I was at. I'm going to be opposed to any kind of a new tax increase. And so with that being said, I agree with what Mike said on the real estate. You know, that's a 5.13% tax increase, and that's unacceptable in today's market with things like it is. Now, the one thing there that I'm willing to talk with and talk about the proposed decrease in personal property. I'm not sure that we can afford to do that, but I'm certainly open to listen and to talk to that. And I've got no problem with just leaving it as it is with the level funding. But I'm not going to agree to any kind of a tax increase on the personal property. That 5% tax increase, that's pretty That's pretty incredible in today's market, I think. And I mean, with like Lori just said, with all the unknowns out there, I mean, this is virgin territory for everybody. We don't have a clue what's going on, and I can't see that we can justify putting any kind more of a burden on our tax people, on our citizens as far as taxing. The rainy day fund, before we get into that very much, I think we really need to be careful and to talk about that a whole lot as to if that $2 million, because it's very concerning to me, and Davenport has cautioned us numerous times. If we start messing with that very much, that changes our status when it comes from the bond ratings and all of that. And we have come too far to get where we're at to go back if we don't have to. Now, I agree with exactly what you said, Mike. If we have to dump into it, that's what it's for. But I think we've got to be extremely, extremely cautious, and we need to do that with Davenport here to talk to us and to tell us and to guide us if that's going to be hurtful instead of helpful.
I agree with you, Ronnie. I have to say, these circumstances we're under, I cannot imagine a bond rating agency dinging us if we had to use some of that excess money in there, as long as we keep the 18 million that keeps our bond rating up. But I don't want us as a board to lose sight of the fact that's not my money, that's not Ronnie's money, that belongs to the citizens of Franklin County.
Agree with you.
And it's time to step up to the plate. Myself as a business owner, I've had to make tough decisions. It's not easy. I've got 2 people out of work, and that's just the nature of the world this day and time. And it's time for us to help these citizens. Everybody in this county pretty much has a vehicle, and we could help everybody a little bit with that personal property cut.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I agree with you 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I agree with what Ronnie's saying too, as I was educated on the letter from Davenport. But I agree that's the citizens' money, and I'd be okay using that $2 million as well. So I know it's not very popular with some of the people up here, but I'll jump on your boat.
Well, I'm not saying we have to spend it all, but we've got it. It's contingency money there we can use, and we might have to use it. And I'm putting it out there now.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a comment, just echoing what Mr. Carter and Mr. Thompson have said. I think that now is not the time to increase the burden on our citizens. And granted, we're not raising the tax rate, but with the reassessment, with the increase in property values due to the reassessment, it is a tax increase. At least that's the perception from the public, and perception is everything, and that's what they believe. And I agree now with these trying times, our people are hurting. Our businesses are hurting. Our people are hurting. And this is, I know we're putting a big burden on Mr. Whitlow and staff, but I do believe that if we have to tap into this $1 to $2 million over and beyond the 18+ million that we have set aside, knowing that we also have a plan in a couple of years when we go to the twice-a-year tax collection to have money to put back into this fund, to strengthen this fund back up to an even stronger level than what it is now. With that plan in place, I think now it really behooves us as a board to, if we need to use that money at this time. Now, granted, $2 million is not going to go a long ways in this budget, and we need to have a plan that in a couple of years we're going to, but you know, one way to look at it too, if our economy is still hurting this bad in a couple of years, we're going to be making some bigger changes anyway. But I agree with Mr. Thompson and Mr. Carter that we need to do something.
How much the 5% decrease in personal property, how much money are we talking about?
Approximately a decrease of from personal property of 5 cents. It's approximately $250,000.
$250,000 is the 5%.
Yeah,
250,000.
and
Talking about 5 cents on
250,000.
personal.
yep, and to equalize the tax rates and other.
Say that again.
Yeah, and if there was an equalization of the tax rate, approximately another $2 million. So approximately 2.2 million that we would need to pull from the county's budget.
I thought the reassessment money was more like 3.7.
You already see one here, but you already last week leveled the school's budget, so you didn't cut them none.
That's
They gonna
correct.
be,
One other comment,
so all the money that we're talking about is gonna come out of the already hurtful county budget and not them. What would that,
we haven't adopted the whole budget, so that could still be adjusted, correct, Chris?
The school budget was adopted last week, and so they've sent out contractual agreements with their personnel, which are contractual obligations. I would have to look at legal counsel. Walking that back could be problematic from a legal standpoint.
I think one thing we're forgetting here too is with the cuts that you put out, Mr. Whitlow, for all the departments, we should expect some money saved from our departments by the end of this fiscal year, correct? Do we have a projection?
Possibly, Mr. Mitchell, I mean, we do have a hiring freeze currently, non-essential spending on expenditures. We won't know that until really year end, because some of that may be counterbalanced, I guess, with the loss of lodging, meals, and sales. So I think we're going to end the year in the black in the 1920 year. I'm looking at our finance director. We still feel fairly confident in that. We're also confident we don't think we'll have the carryover dollars as we've previously had before.
That brings up another point. Last year in November and December, this board doled out $1.5 million of extra money in November and another $1.5 million in December. Do you all remember that?
Yeah.
$3 million right there.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
may.
ma'am.
You know, these are very difficult decisions for this board and this organization and our citizens. And there is no question in my mind that we must do something to provide some assistance to our citizens and our businesses. I think these drastic times are going to require our support without question. The caution that I would give is with the fund balance, the $2 million. I think it might be prudent to use that, Mr. Carter, perhaps as a place to go if the state revenues in a couple months come in significantly below what we can manage. We need a soft place to fall, if you will, if the state numbers are worse than we expect. These are difficult times and difficult choices to be made. I am open to any discussions to help the citizens. I do think that because, Mr. Whitlow, of the discussions that's being held up here, we had talked at the last meeting about perhaps having another work session. I believe that is now in order. I believe it's in order to give you and staff time to digest the feedback you're getting and to have an opportunity to inform the board of what that's going to mean, what it looks like, because we're so close to budget adoption. We need to take a look at that, and we need to make sure that we're looking at the amount of help we're able to provide our citizens while we balance the needs of county services. And I think that's where we're at.
Mr. Chairman, my thought is that on fund balance, that is our lifeline to credit.
Yeah.
And if we borrow that money, then we will not jeopardize the future of Franklin County as far as us getting our bond ratings and being able to borrow money. Now, that being said, I think we need to get Ms. Davenport in here, or Davenport, next meeting, however you want to do it, and let him basically tell us what the consequences are if we touch that money. And like I said, that fund balance is the future of Franklin County. And if we take that money and just maintain just what they say, then I don't think they think we're too good stewards of the keeping up with it. So I would like for staff to invite Davenport in and talk to us about that situation.
Mr. Cundiff, I think you make a good point. And the one thing with fund balance, I think that we've got to be able to, as a board, I'd like to see us take a long view on the decisions that we're making. We certainly need to care about and emphasize what we can do in the here and now for our citizens and for the businesses. But if we are making considerations that may have a long-term adverse impact on the county, we need to take all of those things into consideration as we make these decisions. It's not just the here and now, but as Mr. Cundiff pointed out, fund balance, we've gotten the memo from Davenport, and it's quite clear that they feel that would be injurious to the county's future borrowing capacity and bond rating. So I just think there's a lot of information out there that we need to have in front of us as we seek to get this budget balanced and reflective of the needs up here.
So in our last meeting, the board, you're gonna have to help me there, the board went ahead and level funded to schools budget, everything.
Yeah.
We've got to stop.
We did cut the school budget, didn't we?
No.
Well, maybe not cut it, but we added very little.
It's a level funded.
Anyway,
But we got to stop. We got to stop giving the school everything and then hurting the rest of the county, because that's what's going on. They gave some of their administrative staff a 33% raise last time with that 2% tax increase. And I talked to some teachers, and they said they hadn't gotten 11% raise the whole time. They've been here with all of their raises.
Well, the cafeteria workers, bus drivers,
Exactly.
all at maintenance, custodians, stuff like that, didn't get anything.
They don't get it. The administrate in it.
You said a 33%?
Yeah.
I thought the school system worked on a
No, I
step
said
increase.
an administrator. One administrator got a 33% raise. There's
One.
I've seen documentation to prove that.
So I understood that the step increases, when they do a step increase, everybody gets the same step increase. Now, if you make more money as an administrator, you're going to get a larger percentage of the step increase, right? Is that how it
Typically,
works?
the administrators are not on step.
They're not on step.
So they're
Salaried. They're not on a step scale.
so their salaries can be made whatever wants. Okay.
well,
I think that's a question. I think we need to talk to Jeff Penny about that next meeting we have.
I'd like to make some comments. In my time on the board, I've never supported going into the fund balance because of the long term, and I think Davenport gave us a super good assessment of what it could do to what it would cost us to borrow money in later years. And I think that'd run to about 10% of where we're borrowing money for much less. This is determined by the fund balance. And I think for what we pay for Davenport services, we would do well to have them here and let them explain to us the ins and outs of going into fund balance.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do have copies of that memorandum I'll share with the board again, if the board wishes to take with them to review.
And I'm assuming we need to set a time next week.
It's whatever the pleasure is, Mr. Chairman of the board. Certainly, next week for us to look further. Of course, as I said, by state code, there is a 1-week requirement following the public hearings as to budget adoption. And if the board would like to meet again and have more discussion, of course, we're prepared to do so this evening if the board wishes this evening to look at possible areas that the board, if the board's ready to have that discussion, again, looking at areas to make up the difference in any of the lost revenue. We obviously, as staff, at this point, will need to have discussions and guidance from the board and direction from the board as to what areas would need to be cut. And at this point, we are looking at service reductions.
Yes, and, you know, with the budget already presented, with the reductions, and I think most of us would have a hard time finding or putting our finger on somewhere we could cut another $500,000 or such as that. And I think that's the way we, as board members, need to look at it and support staff as to where we're going to pull this money out. Because if the state comes in middle of the summer with some more heavy-duty cuts, we're going to have to absorb them. And I think we're going to have to support staff as to looking at ways that, you know, if we have to do further reductions. And so are we looking at setting a time next week to meet? Since we have to wait 1 week after the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, just one more comment. You know, I agreed with Mr. Carter, and I know that's not popular across the whole board, but I would hope that we would consider using that money before we would cut personnel and services to the citizens of this county.
And we're going to have to, where are we going to cut? Are we going to cut straight across the board, every department? Are we going to pick departments? You know, there's a lot of things that I think we as a board are going to have to look at.
Mr. Chairman, you know, if we were just to take equalizing the tax rate and some reduction on personal property nominally, you know, we're looking at asking Mr. Whitlow to find approximately $2 million, I believe.
2.2.
$2.2 million in the last iteration of his proposed budget. And
It's not fair to do that to them.
that is significant in terms of being down at the level now that we're cutting things like utilities and supplies. So I just want us to make sure that we realize this is going to be painful, and maybe we need the pain. You know, it's reflective of the times we're in, perhaps. But I just think that to ask Mr. Whitlow to go back and just bring us $2.2 million worth of reductions, I think we're going to have to roll our sleeves up as a board. Perhaps, you know, we're at the point now we're going to have to start looking at funding categories, right? Rather than line items. And as an example, and I'm not picking on any one department, this readily comes to mind. If you look at our library, does the library open 2 days a week versus 5 or 6, whatever the day, you know, where are the savings, you know, with doing something like that on a phased schedule? There are other places, same thing, you know, the trash sites, are they not open as much? I mean, that's where we are. And I think that to support Mr. Whitlow in looking categorically, or maybe giving him at least some guidance categorically at things we would be willing to hear options on. I think what, Mr. Whitlow, I don't mean to speak for you, but I'm just suggesting a way that we can roll our sleeves up and help you with this.
Sure. Today, when do we have to have the budget adopted by?
By state code, budget adoption legally is by June 30th. Mr. Chairman, obviously, the sooner one can be adopted, again, the easier that is upon the staff to make the necessary adjustments. Certainly, and if we are looking at significant revenue reductions, meaning service reductions, and so forth, and what that may look like, Ms. Smith had noted some of those things, and certainly staff has worked to provide various scenarios, knowing and perhaps forecasting that the Commonwealth of Virginia may do significant reductions to funding of localities, both on the comp board as well as our school system. We've anticipated the possibility of that happening, and so we do have some exercises that we can walk the board through. I will tell you, it's not saving paper clips and scissors. That's been done. It is service reductions, whether that's operating hours of various offices, whether that's closing of stations. To get to that level of expenditure reductions, there is nowhere else to go.
Understandable.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think we're at that point that we're gonna have to, it's probably some leases that are running up that can't be renewed. It's probably a lot of things that we're at that point. One of them said the rainy day. Well, I think it's raining pretty hard out there. I don't remember who said that, but somebody on this board said that it's a rainy day and it's raining now. And I'm telling you guys, I know everybody's got their little place that they want to protect, but it's got to come everywhere, not just here or here. It's got to come everywhere, not one or two. I know that, but that's where we're at now, and it's not punishment. People need to understand it's not punishment. It's just the way it is. We'd like to have a new car, but we're not going to get a new car this year. And when you start, I probably overlooked this paper, and I'm sure I got it, but when it starts talking about the potential of using $2 million, and over a period of time, that $2 million could actually cost us $10 million. I'm not sure that's been a steward of taxpayer dollars. That's been, wow. And I think that's what everybody here realizes. We got to be careful of whatever we do could potentially, wow, this is heavy duty. We've never been here before.
Okay, are we gonna set a time for next week? Are we going to sit still? And that's a board decision.
I think we need to sit down and try to help. I don't think it's fair. Lori said that, Mike said that, it's not fair to dump this all on Chris and staff. We need to give them some guidance, and if we need to tell them to cut here and cut there, it's coming from the board, not staff. They don't need. This is a time, and I hope that our department heads and everybody will come together and help us fix this problem. Whatever that solution is, and everybody's got to work together.
Well,
that's where we're at.
I think we all need to be prepared for state budget cuts. And we're not gonna know that until middle of the summer.
At least.
Or maybe later. And if they come in and drop a $2 million cut to us, we're gonna have to be prepared. And I don't think that we're in a position to go with anything other than what staff has recommended as far as this amended budget. Staff has done their work, and I think it's time for this board to do our work and support them. And I'm still asking for a meeting time next week.
6 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, I think that we had a date penciled in, was it June 3rd, Mr. Whitlow?
June 2nd, that's
Second.
Tuesday, that's 1 week from today. As I understand, and of course, if it's pleasure of the board, earlier in the afternoon, but I'm sensitive to schedules and everyone's work schedules and so forth, but maybe the sooner in the afternoon or morning, whatever.
How about Ronnie? What suits you, Ronnie?
Well, I'm gonna put it to you like this, and thank you for that. I will be here if I can. I'm gonna have to find somebody to sit with my wife when I'm gone, and it's easier for me to get a sitter later in the day.
What time? What time suits you?
This afternoon was good at 6 o'clock.
And are you all wanting Mr. Rose to come from Davenport for this meeting? Is that what I was hearing?
Me personally, I'm not concerned about what they have to say.
Okay.
I read on the governmental accounting website that excess funds that are not associated, we can use any way we want to. I'm not concerned about a ding in our credit rating. I think any bond rating company is going to look at this time as a very unusual time, and I don't hardly see how they can ding us for that if we have this overage, this money that's not already addressed to be used.
Well, and Mr. Carter, I just
I
said.
read their letter. I got all that. I think it's a lot of BS, quite frankly.
And the only reason
That's just my opinion.
well, the only reason I raised it is because several supervisors.
If they want to hear
Yeah,
them
had
and have them
mentioned it.
come, I'm fine with that. But I read their letter and I did my own research, and we can use that money.
I don't think there's any question whether we can use it, yes. I don't disagree with the fact that we can use it. But anyway, we're fighting ourselves here. We need to go ahead and try to set a time next week and let us kind of digest what we've talked about tonight.
Anytime but Monday. I
Okay,
gotta go to Duke Monday.
all right.
But, I'm asking you if it's at all possible to do it in the afternoon. It don't have to be 6 o'clock, but,
Fits me better too, Ronnie.
huh?
It works better for me too.
But if we're in, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, whatever, I'll leave that up.
What's the rate we're going, but it'll be 4 o'clock.
Sir,
Can 4 o'clock, can you suit 4 o'clock suit you? Ronnie?
I can make that work.
All right.
If I have to be late, I'll call, but
BZA will be in here Tuesday. We have one item scheduled.
I understand from the clerk that we do have a BZA public hearing in the boardroom next Tuesday. It's a possibility, I think B75 may be available.
Yes, as long as, I just want to make sure
We
that.
can check
Thank
for B75 if that works.
That's where we would normally hold our work sessions.
So we can check on
Yeah.
that. And did we say 4 p.m.?
Yeah.
Is that what I hear?
That's what I, that suit y'all?
on
4
June
p.m. I'll be here.
Next
5.
Tuesday.
Yes, sir.
June 2nd at 4 p.m. And, any information that the board could certainly, ask staff in terms of possibilities. We have developed an exercise that we can walk the board through in terms of service reductions and how that equates to actual revenue, expenditure reductions and how that equates to revenue. And that may be beneficial for this board. We did a similar exercise during the recession with the previous boards. And so we can be prepared to do so. We can do so this evening, or we can do so certainly next week.
Chris, let me ask you a question before leading into that. we've got approximately, if I understand, 22 million in that fund.
It's approximately, the undesignated fund balance, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, is approximately 20 million.
20 million.
Yes, sir.
But 18 of it is spoke for because we've got to do it
With our,
based upon what we've got
with your approved financial
approved to
policies.
have there. So that leaves, that's the two.
That's correct. And of course, that is what we call, just like, I know it's been mentioned, the twice a year tax collections and so forth, that one-time windfall. Similarly, fund balance works the same way. It is one-time dollars. It's not necessarily ongoing revenue. Once it's used, it will not be there next year for ongoing expenses, operational expenses. So, typically for capital items and so forth, one-time expenditures, sometimes those funds, have been utilized for those type of things, but they're not ongoing revenue. So once they're utilized, they're utilized. But yes, sir, to answer your question.
Okay, so we'll meet next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and that's June 2nd. And we've already closed the public hearing, and so we need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, couple of other items this evening under other matters. I just had a couple of other things, and I'll just briefly mention this to the board. I mentioned last week that the CARES Act, which is the federal stimulus to state and local governments, our staff, Mr. Burnett, Mr. Carter, Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Harrison, have been working over the last few days, just really delving into the CARES Act and what that looks like. The main point I want to get across to the board on the CARES Act so far is vague. It is quite vague from the state guidance that the Secretary of Finance has handed down to the localities. And so we're really seeking further federal guidance at this point. We do understand from our auditors in an exercise of fiscal caution, these are federal dollars, and they can only be utilized for certain reimbursable expenses as related to COVID, i.e. personal protective equipment, sanitation, and so forth. They cannot be utilized to supplant our lost revenue. It's still very vague of what they can be utilized for. And so staff is really working through that. As an example, we're looking to see if it could be utilized for laptops to replace desktops in terms of our telework of county employees and so forth. We're not sure. We think that's a viable request. However, the agreements that all localities have signed, if the federal dollars come in and the federal government says, nope, you expended that incorrectly, then we have to pay it back. Very serious from that standpoint. Therefore, what we do know and what localities are doing is to make sure they have a staff person on board, contracted accounting services, if you will, to have someone dedicated for that. And as I mentioned last week, our allocation potentially, it's not that the federal government, we can receive up to $4.8 million. I say we could receive up to. It's not going to say that we're going to be able to draw down and utilize all of that 4.8. Many localities, many accountants are very frustrated that most of those dollars may have to be sent back just because they're not for those reimbursable expenses. Congress is working through now trying to look at some flexibility of the CARES Act dollars, but so far there hasn't been any guarantee that we're going to see that flexibility. We are the fiscal agent. We are the grant recipient, if you will, for the towns, for the town of Boones Mill and the town of Rocky Mount. We are still working through really understanding all the nuances and restrictions of these federal dollars. And so we'll be doing so in the coming weeks. I will say that we will have hopefully delve more into it by your June 16th meeting to give you a little more detail. And all the other localities are in the same position we are. There's a lot of frustration now around the state regarding the CARES Act dollars and not knowing and the risk that's involved. To follow up from last week, I think Mr. Mitchell, you had mentioned the volunteer contributions and so forth. We have looked at that, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem that they are reimbursable expenses in terms of the lump sum to the volunteer agencies. Of course, the board can utilize, as the discussion went last week, to pull from the current 19-20 year budget if the board wanted to, from that current contingency. And I've shared those numbers and balances with you all. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to utilize the CARES Act for those things. Now, that being said, personal protective equipment, all of those things that Mr. Ferguson and the Public Safety Office, in terms of getting out to the volunteer departments, yes, we can get reimbursed. But in terms of lump sum funding, very iffy on apparatus support or equipment. Again, it's really tied specifically to the virus. So hands are tied in a lot of ways, and it's very
I
frustrating.
appreciate that.
So,
But to catch Mr. Thompson up, what I suggested last week, Mr. Thompson, was we've got approximately $63,000 left in our contingency fund, and with the virus, our volunteer fire departments have not been able to hold their fundraisers. I use Henry Fire Department, Martinsville Speedway. They usually get $7,000 to $8,000 for parking cars. Callaway wasn't able to have their ham supper, which on a good year can generate as much as $7,000. So if we take that $50,000, we divide it up amongst the 10 departments in the county. And I apologize to the 3 departments on the outside of the county, but right now we've got to do what we can with what little we got. That would give each department roughly $5,000 just to make ends meet this year. And we have that money. I spoke with Mr. Carter. He doesn't foresee having to use that $50,000 in the contingency fund, but I would like to look at taking that $50,000 and giving each fire department $5,000 each.
And then turn around and lay off people.
Did we do that?
I'm not up for laying off anyone. I'm with Mike Carter about using the $2 million to make sure we don't lay people off.
Okay. So
But
we-
volunteers have got to make ends meet. They've got to be able to supply their firefighters with gear. They've got to have the funds to make it work.
We didn't take action on the proposals last week to,
no, sir. I think the board
Okay.
waited till this evening until we could hear back from the.
Yeah, I amended my motion to wait till tonight, because you were going to see what, if anything, could be done with the CARES money. So
anything else?
I have one comment on that CARES money. I don't know exactly how that program works, but on the PPP, the Small Business Administration stuff, the dynamics of that's changing weekly. Some of that money is going to be forgiven. Some of it you're going to have to pay back in a loan. If we can bide a little more time, we may get more information on this CARES Act and know exactly what we can use it for and what we're going to get, and maybe some of that money will be forgiven before we deplete the supervisor's fund.
So do you, Chris, after your meeting Friday with Brian and everybody,
The CARES Act, and Mr. Carter, as you noted, and Mr. Mitchell, the CARES Act, it runs from expenses at the start of the virus in March all the way through December 31st of this year. So we have access to those dollars up until December 30th, I believe, not 31st. I don't know why they said 30th and not 31st, but it's December 30th at the end of this calendar year. So we have access to those funds up until then, and we are getting more guidance, more information as we go along, and we'll certainly be bringing that back to you all monthly, really, and at each meeting, every opportunity we have, we're looking.
well, they don't need it right now. So if that's the pleasure of the board to give it another month and reevaluate it, because we had a June 16th
We have
meeting.
a June 16th regular meeting, yes, sir.
So I would ask that, maybe it get put on the agenda for that meeting, if the chairman will approve it, that we have a discussion. And maybe, Tim, if you'd be willing to help me talk to the fire chiefs and see if they can wait a little bit longer as we learn more about the CARES Act and,
I'm sure all of the definitions for the CARES Act won't be met by next month. And I don't know whether you agree with me or not, Chris.
I'm not sure.
don't know.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman.
Anyway, and I'm thinking there's a lot of carrots out there that, you know, these funds may end up going back where they came from. Because if there's not so many limitations and, you know, things that we thought we might could use seem to be going away. Anyway, do we do our
Mr. Chairman, that unless the board has any other items this evening, again, Tuesday, June the 2nd, 4 p.m. for a work session for the proposed modified budget. And then I think there were some carryover items from the closed session that the board did not get to, they being A5, discussion concerning a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry, and A1, personnel discussion of appointments to county boards and commissions. I think those were two items that we were not able to get to in the previous closed session. So it's the pleasure of the board if they want to hold that closed session to continue tonight.
are we going to do appointments tonight?
That would come following the closed session, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Are we ready for a closed session?
Mr. Chairman, can I make just one final quick comment that came to me quickly to Mr. Whitlow? As you consider bringing information back to the board for the work session, I'm interested, I'm sure the board would be interested in looking at our debt service payments as they are more than likely going to escalate. I know there were inferred tax increases up through 2025 on the debt service schedule, and we need to understand how that's going to come into play. Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready for closed session? Okay, I need a motion. Franklin County Board of Supervisors will motion to enter closed session in accordance with 2.23711A1, personnel discussion of appointments to county boards and commissions, discussion of the acquisition of real property or the disposition of real property, discussion A5, discussion concerning a prospective business or industry and the expansion of existing business or industry. A7, consultant with legal counsel, Code of Virginia is amended. Madam Clerk, will you do a roll call?
First need a motion and a second, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We need a motion.
I make a motion we adjourn into closed session for the aforementioned applications.
Second.
May I do
Okay.
a roll call vote? Supervisor Mitchell?
yes.
Supervisor Smith?
Yes.
Supervisor Thompson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cundiff?
Yes.
Supervisor Carter?
Yes.
Supervisor Tatum?
Yes.
And Chairman Mitchell?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are in closed session.